How to start a flirtatious conversation without being creepy. Why most men sound creepy without realizing it. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. Most men don't fail at flirting because they lack confidence. They fail because they misunderstand what attraction actually responds to. They think attraction is about the perfect line, the clever opener, the smooth compliment, the right words delivered at the right moment. So they rehearse lines, they memorize techniques, they watch videos that promise the one sentence that makes women instantly attracted. But here's the reality nobody tells them. Flirting is not about what you say, it's about how safe and interesting you make the moment feel. And when a man doesn't understand this difference, something strange happens. Even if his words are technically polite, they feel off. Too eager, too intense, too rehearsed. And that's when the label appears. Creepy. The creepiness is rarely about the words themselves. It's about pressure. Pressure to respond. Pressure to be impressed. Pressure to validate the man's effort. The moment a conversation feels like an obligation instead of a discovery, attraction disappears. This is why many men experience the same frustrating pattern. They approach politely. They say something harmless. They even smile. And yet the energy collapses almost instantly. Short answers, forced smiles, excuses to leave. From the outside, it feels confusing, but from a psychological perspective, the explanation is simple. Attraction responds to freedom, not pressure. The moment someone feels they must react a certain way, the brain begins searching for escape. And this is where most flirting advice completely fails. It teaches men what to say, but not how to create the emotional atmosphere that makes flirting natural. Because real flirtation doesn't start with words. It starts with energy. Think about the difference between two situations. In one situation, a man approaches with nervous urgency. He speaks quickly. He tries to impress. He searches for approval in her reaction. In another situation, a man simply begins a conversation like he's curious about the world around him. His voice is calm. His body language is relaxed. His attention is present. The words may even be similar, but the experience is completely different. One feels like a performance. The other feels like a moment unfolding naturally, and attraction lives inside that difference. Because flirtation is not a technique. It is a psychological signal. It tells the other person something very specific. This interaction is safe, playful, and open to possibility. But here's where the misunderstanding becomes dangerous. Many men try to force flirtation immediately. They jump straight into compliments. They signal attraction too quickly. They attempt to create chemistry before the moment has even had time to breathe. And that's when things begin to feel uncomfortable, because attraction has a natural rhythm, and when that rhythm is rushed, the interaction becomes awkward. The smartest conversationalists understand something subtle. The best flirtation often begins without flirting at all. It begins with curiosity, with observation, with a simple human moment that doesn't demand anything in return. In fact, the most effective flirtatious conversations often start in ways that barely look like flirting. A casual comment about the environment, a playful observation, a light question about something happening in the moment. Nothing forced, nothing rehearsed. Just an invitation into a shared moment. Because when attraction develops naturally, something fascinating happens inside the mind. Instead of evaluating the man's performance, the woman begins participating in the interaction. And once someone feels like a participant instead of a target, the entire dynamic changes. The conversation stops feeling like an approach. It starts feeling like an experience unfolding between two people. And this is the first secret most men never learn. Flirting is not about getting attention. It's about creating curiosity. When curiosity appears, attention follows automatically. But when attention is demanded directly, curiosity disappears. Which leads us to the next realization. Many men believe flirtation is about being bold, but the truth is much more interesting. The most attractive flirtation is usually subtle. It lives in small signals. A slight smile, a playful tone, a moment of shared humor. It doesn't overwhelm the conversation. It simply adds a layer of energy beneath it, like a current running quietly under the surface. This is why the best flirtatious conversations often feel effortless. They don't feel like someone trying to impress another person. They feel like two people discovering each other through small moments of connection. And when that discovery happens naturally, attraction begins to build almost invisibly. But before we talk about how to start these conversations, we need to understand something even more important. Because many men are not struggling with conversation skills. They're struggling with the mindset they bring into the interaction. And until that mindset changes, no technique will work consistently. Because people don't just respond to words, they respond to intentions. And when the intention behind a conversation feels desperate or out, it leaks through the interaction no matter how smooth the words appear. Which brings us to the most important shift you can make before starting any flirtatious conversation. You must stop seeing the interaction as a test you need to pass, and start seeing it as a moment you are curious to explore. Because the moment curiosity replaces pressure, flirting stops feeling creepy and starts feeling magnetic. But this realization leads to a deeper question. If flirting isn't about lines, and it isn't about forcing attraction, then what exactly creates the spark between two strangers in the first place? The answer is surprisingly simple, and once you understand it, starting a flirtatious conversation becomes far easier than most men realize. But it requires understanding a psychological principle most people completely overlook, and that principle changes everything. The 3 psychological triggers that create natural flirting. Now that we understand why most conversations fail, we can finally look at what actually creates flirtation naturally. And surprisingly, it isn't charm. It isn't confidence alone. And it definitely isn't a memorized pickup line. Flirtation emerges when 3 psychological triggers are present in a conversation. When these triggers appear, attraction begins to grow almost automatically. But when they're missing, even the most confident man can sound awkward. Let's break them down. Trigger 1. Curiosity. Curiosity is the engine of flirtation. When someone becomes curious about you, their brain begins filling in the blanks. They start wondering things. Who is this person? Why do they seem different? What will they say next? And that curiosity is what creates engagement. Most men try to impress. Instead of creating curiosity, they talk too much. They reveal too much. They explain themselves too quickly. But mystery is powerful. When a conversation leaves small gaps, the brain becomes interested in filling them. This is why short, playful comments often work better than long explanations. For example, imagine 2 different approaches. The first man says, "Hi, I just saw you from across the room and thought you were beautiful, so I had to come say hello." Polite, but predictable. Now imagine a second approach. He looks at something happening nearby and says, "I'm trying to figure something out. Is this place always this chaotic? Or did I just arrive at the wrong time?" Suddenly, there's curiosity. She might laugh. She might respond. But either way, the conversation has space to breathe. The moment is shared, and that shared moment becomes the doorway to flirtation, because curiosity invites participation, and participation creates connection. Trigger 2. Playfulness. Flirtation lives inside playful energy, not seriousness, not intensity. Playfulness signals something important to the brain. It signals low pressure, and low pressure is where attraction feels safe enough to grow. Think about how children interact. They tease, they joke, they experiment with conversation without worrying about the outcome. That same energy exists inside adult flirtation, but many men lose access to it because they become too focused on results. They approach a conversation like an interview. They ask logical questions. Where are you from? What do you do? How long have you lived here? None of these questions are wrong, but they rarely create energy. Playfulness does something different. It creates emotion. For example, instead of asking, "Do you come here often?" a playful approach might sound like, "Okay, serious question. Is this place secretly amazing? Or did we both just wander in here by accident?" Notice the difference. The question invites imagination. It invites personality. And most importantly, it invites a smile, because flirtation is not about gathering information. It's about creating a shared emotional moment. Trigger 3. Emotional safety. This is the trigger most men completely overlook. For flirtation to feel comfortable, the other person must feel free to disengage. This might sound strange, but the brain constantly evaluates social risk. If someone feels trapped in a conversation, even subtly, Their nervous system shifts into defense mode. They become polite instead of present. This is why the best conversationalists give people space inside the interaction. They don't demand responses. They don't hover. They don't force momentum. Instead, they create what psychologists call open loops. An open loop is a conversational doorway that the other person can choose to step into. For example, I'm not sure if this is a good idea or not, but I feel like I should ask. Notice how this creates curiosity while leaving space. It invites engagement instead of demanding it. And when someone chooses to participate voluntarily, attraction feels natural instead of pressured. Now, let's combine these 3 triggers into one of the most powerful conversation starters. Instead of starting a conversation about the person directly, you start with something happening in the environment. This removes pressure immediately, because you're not evaluating them. You're sharing an observation. For example, that guy has been staring at the menu for 5 minutes. I think he's having an existential crisis over tacos. Or, I feel like everyone in this room knows something I don't. These small observations create shared awareness, and shared awareness instantly connects to strangers, because the conversation becomes about the moment, not about the individuals themselves. From there, the interaction can naturally shift toward flirtation. Why direct compliments often fail? Many men believe compliments are the best way to start flirting. But compliments are tricky, because they can easily create pressure. If the first thing someone hears is, "You're really beautiful," the brain immediately processes expectation. How should I respond? Is this person expecting something? And suddenly, the conversation feels heavy. But compliments can work when they appear inside a conversation, not at the beginning of it. For example, after a few playful exchanges, a man might casually say, "You have a very dangerous smile." I feel like trouble usually follows that. Now the compliment feels playful. It feels earned. And because connection already exists, it enhances the interaction instead of forcing it. The real goal of flirtation. Here's the deeper insight most people miss. The goal of flirtation is not to impress someone. It's to create a shared emotional experience. A moment where both people feel present. Where curiosity replaces awkwardness, where laughter replaces pressure. When that happens, attraction doesn't feel like something being forced. It feels like something being discovered. And once that discovery begins, conversations start flowing naturally. But there's still one more piece most men struggle with. Because starting a conversation is only the first step. The real challenge is keeping the energy alive without becoming awkward or trying too hard. And this is where most interactions either grow into real chemistry or slowly collapse into small talk. In the final section, we'll break down exactly how to keep flirtatious energy alive in a conversation without ever sounding creepy or desperate. Because once you understand this final principle, flirting becomes something completely different. It stops feeling like a skill you have to perform and starts feeling like a natural extension of your presence. The flirtation flow, how attraction builds naturally. By now you understand something most men never learn. Flirting isn't about lines. It isn't about forcing attraction, and it certainly isn't about trying to impress someone within the first 30 seconds of meeting them. Real flirtation is a flow of emotional energy between 2 people. And like any flow, it follows a rhythm. When that rhythm is understood, conversations begin to feel natural, even exciting. But when it's ignored, interactions become awkward or forced. This rhythm is what we call the flirtation flow, and it moves through 3 simple stages. Stage 1. Light engagement. At the beginning of any interaction, the goal is not attraction. The goal is comfort. You are simply creating a moment of human connection, nothing more. This is why the first few moments of a conversation should feel relaxed and casual. You might comment on the environment. You might make a playful observation. You might ask a light question. But the key detail is this. You are not trying to impress. You are simply sharing the moment. When someone feels comfortable speaking with you, their brain relaxes, their guard lowers, and once that happens, something interesting begins to appear. Personality. Now the conversation starts to feel real, and that's when the second stage begins. Stage 2. Playful tension. Flirtation lives inside playful tension. This is where many men become confused. Because tension does not mean seriousness, and it certainly does not mean pressure. Playful tension simply means there is a spark of emotional energy inside the interaction. You might tease gently. You might challenge a comment in a playful way. You might exaggerate something humorously. For example, if she mentions she loves coffee, you might say, "That explains everything." Coffee people are always slightly chaotic. The tone is light. The energy is playful, and most importantly, it invites a reaction. She might laugh. She might challenge you back. But either way, the interaction becomes dynamic instead of static. And that dynamic energy is where flirtation lives. Because attraction grows when two people are emotionally engaged in the same moment. Stage 3. Subtle signals of interest. Once playful tension appears, the conversation begins to change. Small signals of attraction start to appear naturally. Longer eye contact, more relaxed body language, smiles that linger slightly longer than normal. This is the moment where many men make a mistake. They suddenly become serious. They try to turn the conversation into a direct expression of interest. But when attraction is already building, intensity is not necessary. Subtlety is far more powerful. For example, instead of saying, "I think you're really attractive," you might simply say something like, "You're interesting. I didn't expect this conversation to be this fun." Notice the difference. It acknowledges the connection without placing pressure on the moment, and that allows attraction to continue growing naturally. The push-pull dynamic. One of the most powerful elements of flirtation is something called push-pull. This dynamic creates playful contrast inside the conversation. You might tease someone lightly, then follow it with a moment of warmth. For example, "You seem like trouble, but the interesting kind." The first part creates playful tension. The second part softens it. This emotional contrast keeps the interaction engaging, because the brain becomes curious about what comes next. But the key to push-pull is balance. If the teasing feels aggressive, it becomes uncomfortable. If the compliments feel excessive, it becomes predictable. The magic happens when both elements exist in harmony. Reading the energy of the moment. One of the most valuable skills in flirtation is learning to read the energy of the interaction. Because attraction rarely needs to be forced. It reveals itself through small signals. If someone leans into the conversation, if they ask questions back, if they laugh easily, or maintain eye contact, these are signs that the interaction feels good to them. But if responses become short or distracted, the best response is not persistence. It is graceful awareness. Sometimes the most attractive thing a person can do is simply say, "Well, I won't interrupt your day any longer, but this was fun." Confidence does not demand attention. Confidence respects the moment. And strangely enough, that respect often makes people more curious about you afterward. Why natural flirting feels effortless. When you look closely at great conversationalists, something stands out. They are not trying to control the outcome. They are simply present inside the moment. They listen, they observe, they respond with curiosity instead of calculation. And because of that, their conversations feel alive. Flirting stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like a shared discovery between two people. This is why some people seem naturally magnetic. It isn't because they know clever lines. It's because their presence invites people into a moment that feels enjoyable and real. The deeper truth about attraction is rarely about perfection. It is about energy, the energy of curiosity, the energy of playfulness, the energy of someone who is comfortable with themselves. When those elements appear together, conversations begin to feel effortless. And flirtation becomes something simple, not a trick, not a strategy, just two people exploring a moment with curiosity and a little bit of playful mystery. Most men spend years searching for the perfect line, but the most attractive conversations rarely start with perfect words. They start with something much simpler: presence, curiosity, and the courage to share a moment without forcing what happens next. Because the truth is, when someone enjoys the moment they're having with you, flirting takes care of itself. If this perspective changed how you see attraction, make sure to subscribe. Because here we don't teach manipulation. We explore the psychology behind connection, confidence, and human interaction. And if you've ever had a conversation that unexpectedly turned into something unforgettable, drop a comment below. I want to hear how it started. Sometimes the smallest moments lead to the most interesting stories.